focusing on the basic blocking and tackling to drive outcomes and productivity at the factory floor. I think industrial base is very closely aligned to national security because, as I called them before, they're noble jobs, they pay well, but they're so important in terms of what you need to do in times of trouble like we're in right now.
All right. Welcome to the Factory Doctor Podcast. I'm excited to have our special guest, Tom Gentile, with me today. Welcome to the podcast, Tom.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. Just to let all of our listeners and followers know, today we're going to talk a little bit about leadership, strategy, and industrial policy. So let's dig into there. Before we get going, let me highlight a little bit about Tom's career and where you're at right now. So Tom, obviously, very well known in the aerospace and defense industry, and your role as president and CEO of Hexcel, which is a dominant composites provider in the aerospace and defense market. You also spent time at Spirit Aerosystems as the CEO. And then before that, interestingly, at GE Capital and GE Healthcare, and also in the Six Sigma part of the group. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And then ultimately starting your career as at General Motors as a trade analyst, right? So maybe it would be great to hear a little bit about those, Tom, and then we'll get into the content.
Right. So, Alex, well, the General Motors connection was because I'm from Detroit. I'd always dreamed about being in the auto industry. So it was a summer internship when I was a junior at college that got me into a group called Motors Trading at General Motors. And they did something called counter trade, which is they would generate foreign exchange in places that didn't have access to it to buy General Motors products. And some of the products that we bought overseas to generate foreign exchange were commodities like copper, tin, and zinc in Zaire, which we brought over to the U.S. and sold to Patriot Electric and Harrison Radiator. And I was the trade analyst responsible for all the logistics. That's how I got into it. And then later, when I went to General Electric, I spent actually my first 10 years in GE Capital in consumer finance, and then got a call to switch over to join GE Aviation. Scott Donnelly was the CEO at the time, and I joined the service group to lead it, which did the manufacturing, repair, and overhaul for all the jet engines and the spare parts. And just before that, I got my master black belt in Six Sigma. Jack Welch was making a big push on that when I first joined GE. And so I took the test, I got the master black belt, and it served me well. It's a great tool to have in terms of driving productivity in factories and in trying to get to on-time delivery in our industry.
I do have to ask, like, what was that like? Before we get into content, like, what was that like working in the Jack Welch era? Like, I only read about it, right? In this, and I was never that close to it. But like, what was that like?
Well, I only overlapped a couple of years, and of course, I was very junior at the time, and Jack was the CEO. But he was incredibly involved in different businesses. And the first time I met him, I called him Mr. Welch. He said, "No, Jack." So that was that. And but he was extremely involved, and he really liked Six Sigma. And because I had gotten my master black belt, that probably gave me a little bit more access to him. And we talked about it a lot. And he was really a person who cared deeply about the business, cared deeply about people, but was a hard driver. Yeah, very demanding and held people accountable. And so those are lessons I took from him.
That's amazing. I love to hear those classic stories about some of the great leaders of past decades. So great to hear. Maybe we'll get a little bit more into this. So let's start with something a little bit easier. Like, what's on your mind that people are not in whether it's aerospace, defense, or broader industrials? What are people not talking about today that they should be?
Well, when I think about our industry, there's lots of things right now with the situation in Iran. Oil prices are spiking. We've had the pandemic and the recovery from that, and supply chain is taking longer to recover. But I want to focus on something positive when I think about what we should be talking about. And it's the jobs that we create in aerospace and defense, because I think they're some of the greatest jobs in the world. Years ago, I was in AIA, and Tom Kennedy was the president at the time. He was the CEO then of Raytheon. And he talked about noble jobs in our industry. And I think that's absolutely the way to describe it, because our jobs have a great sense of mission and purpose. They help us connect the world. They're technical. They pay well. They great benefits. They have lots of professional development and opportunities to grow. And they're at the forefront of technology. And so I think they're just fantastic jobs. And we don't talk enough about that in our industry. I've got a lot of friends in Wichita that joined Spirit, now Boeing, but on the front line, and they make great money. They advance. They have great careers. They can work overtime with great benefits. But most importantly, they are contributing enormously to the economy in the U.S. and the world by making aircraft. And I did some quick numbers. And when Boeing gets back to 52 aircraft a month, those 52 aircraft, if you think about each of them holds about 180 passengers, and each of them might fly between 5 and 10 cycles a day. And pretty soon, when you think about a 20 or 30 year life, you get up to over 6 or 7 billion people that the planes that the people at Boeing and Wichita and in Airbus are building are carrying. And that's just enormous when you add it up. So we have noble jobs in our industry, and we need to highlight that even more.
No, that's great. I mean, one of the things you said there, connecting the world, and especially in the engines, like back to GE, and it always comes back to engines, right? When we're coming to that. I mean, yes, there's all kinds of other issues that pop up here and there, but at the end of the day, it comes back to engines and powering people from place to place. So, no, great to hear about that, and I think that's a great segue, Tom, into kind of people, right? Like, how do you, in talking about jobs and such. So a little bit more specifically, internal business, how do you organize, influence? How do you lead teams to achieve business objectives? Tell us a little bit about your style.
Well, first, I think it's important to have a very clear vision and mission for the business, and then to translate that into specific actions. And so while I know some people might think it's soft, but a mission statement is very important. And again, I go back to my GE Aviation days. And David Joyce was CEO at the time we developed our mission. And he developed something that I thought was extremely poetic. It's we invent the future of flight. We lift people up and we bring them back safely. We help invent the future of flight. We lift people up and we bring them back safely. And I thought that just encapsulated exactly what GE Aviation did. And then GE Aerospace has maintained that. At Hexcel, our mission statement now is lightweighting to propel the future. Because we make lightweight material, which is 5 times stronger than aluminum and 30% lighter. But having a strong mission statement that people can have a sense of purpose is important. And then being able to translate that into specific objectives and goals for each team, each individual, and what they need to do to achieve and contribute to the overall mission. And then to be able to measure and track the different actions and have scorecards and dashboards to communicate it. These are all important elements of how you organize a team and drive execution to achieve an outcome.
Yeah, what's interesting about that, Tom? I would say two things. Number one is I like your guys' slogan. That's probably from your McKinsey days, right? Being able to get that creativity, right? But more seriously, people want to come to work to win every day, right? And having a strong mission statement is important. So I don't think it's cliche, and I don't think it's basic. Those companies that don't have that can struggle with their people, right? Where they don't have a goal, they don't have that north direction, if you will, as to what they need to do to be successful. So totally agree with you on that.
I agree. People want to have a purpose in what they do every day. You spend a lot of time at work.
Yeah.
And you want it to mean something. And again, that's the great thing about our industry is we do have such a great purpose in connecting the people.
No, yeah, absolutely amazing. Well, next thing after people's product, right? So, where do you where do you spend your time improving kind of the quality, delivery, design? Ultimately, how do you make your customer happy?
Right. Well, I think you got to go upstream and make sure you have all of the pieces in place. Starting with the right infrastructure and capital that's maintained and ready to go, having all the right people and enough of them and trained and ready to contribute, having the right supply chain. In our industry, supply chain is so important. That old saying, how many parts do you need to make an airplane? And the answer is all of them. So you need all of them. And so and that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of coordination. And so all of those things are important. But I think once you have the basics in place, to me, that you have to start off with safe work. I spend a lot of time, even as CEO, focused on safety. We start every meeting with a safety moment, and we talk about how do we improve the safety, because if you have a safe workplace, everything else follows from that. Now, in aviation, safety is obviously critical, flight safety. Now, as a supplier, we don't contribute directly to that. The OEMs do, the airlines do, but where we can contribute is quality, because the quality of our products or our material is what ends up in the aircraft that fly people. And so by ensuring that we have absolutely outstanding quality, we can contribute to flight safety. And so you create a safe work environment and you have great quality to contribute to flight safety. I think that's where it all begins from a product standpoint in aviation.
Well, and from a lean perspective, SQDCP, right? Safety, quality, delivery, cost, productivity, right? It's in that order, right? In the sense of, and sometimes the back end can shuffle a little bit, but you're absolutely right. It starts with safety up front. And when people feel safe there, then the rest of the stuff starts to happen naturally. Well, good. So then, obviously from product, you have to have productivity, right? So let's talk a little bit about the levers in how you improve business performance, production processes. Kind of what are your thoughts there? And I'd really like to hear it also from like your reflection as a Six Sigma, because there's not many black belt Six Sigmas out there. So I could probably say you're one of the only true black belt Six Sigmas I've ever known.
Right. Well, what I would say is productivity is really, it starts with blocking and tackling. And the best tools, I do believe, are things like Six Sigma and Lean. And Six Sigma, when we learned it way back when, was all about reducing defects, and 3.9 defects per million opportunities. But it's three the variations, sigmas away from the mean in terms of encompassing all the data. But it's about reducing defects. It's also about reducing variation. And processes really struggle if there's lots of variation. And so when we were focusing on Six Sigma, it was about reducing defects, but also eliminating variation in processes so you create better outcomes more consistent. When you combine that with Lean, which is about eliminating waste, you really create a very powerful tool. And so that's what I've always started with is focus on process, eliminate defects, eliminate variation, eliminate waste. And Kaizen events are a great way to drive that in any organization. And so that's a starting point. Once you get those basics and you get everybody focused on it, and speaking up and participating, then you can start to add other tools and technology. And in our industry, I think digital technology is playing a very big role. And how do you create workflows on the factory floor? How do you track information throughout the whole system? How do you track parts? How do you create transparency in the whole production system? That's incredibly important. And what you see is some great examples of organizations that have really taken it to the next level. And I'll point out Larry Culp at GE Aerospace. He came from Danaher, and he developed this great production system at Danaher, which he brought to GE, and he named it Flight Deck. And he's written now a lot about it and talked about it on some of his earnings calls and in his presentations about how he uses basic elements of Six Sigma and Lean to drive out variation in the processes and to improve the outcomes. And they've had some amazing results. And I think it's just a good example of focusing on the basic blocking and tackling to drive outcomes and productivity at the factory floor.
No, that's great. You brought that up because I actually wrote for Aviation Week an article on GE's Flight Deck and interviewed them on it and did that and really kind of took that culture, people, metrics approach, right, that they do and driving performance. So it is a fantastic process, and I hope I could get Larry to come on the show one of these days, right? But let's move. You talked a little bit about digital, and I'm going to tag on a little bit about AI. And so maybe I'd like to get your perspective, Tom, on more strategy and how are you thinking about strategy around some of these amazing but yet still immature, low TRL or technology readiness level around these tools, capabilities, and for whether it's advanced manufacturing, back office, Can you talk a little about digital AI and maybe strategy of that within maybe a company where you can?
Right. Well, I think at the factory floor, people talk about Industry 2.0, Industry 4.0, and some of the tools that exist. And I think that it's basic digitization tools of sensors and monitoring and being able to track parts through a system and a production line. It's also things like being able to track employees. Are they in attendance? Do they have the right certifications and training to perform a certain job? Are you tracking the start and the stop of the job? Are you tracking the quality of each job? And so those are some of the basic things that you can do with some of the digital tools now on the factory floor. And if you combine that with automation and robotics, you can really start to get some step level changes in terms of productivity. So those are some of the ways that I've seen people leverage these Industry 4.0 tools to achieve better productivity on the factory floor.
Do you see a difference between, and we're probably veering way off course here, but do you see a difference in the application of those tools and digitization between composites and metallics?
Well, a little bit. I think the biggest difference is that I've learned being in composites is that it's continuous process flow. So if you look at a composites factory, we start off making the carbon fiber, and that's a process where we start with a chemical called acrylonitrile. We extrude it into filaments, and then we basically stretch and heat those filaments, but in fibers that end up being miles long. And so it's a continuous process flow. And it's all about controlling parameters and inputs and outputs and heat and time and things like that. In a discrete manufacturing environment, it's a little bit different because you're controlling labor inputs and schedules and specific tasks that are accomplished. Okay, and so those are some differences between a continuous process flow manufacturing process and a discrete manufacturing process.
No, that's great. So maybe we talked about that digitization, some AI, the process flows and such. Maybe talk to me about technology. So like, where do you think, what technology do you think is going to change our industry, aerospace, defense, maybe broader industrials? Like what's happening that's going to be dynamic?
Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of a not traditional answer. And I will say material technology is something that I think is very important. And the reason I say that is because even when I'm back in my GE days, all the senior leaders were actually material scientists. David Joyce, Chip Blankenship, Kevin McAllister, they all had a deep materials background. And the reason is because materials was so important to propulsion because there was thermal efficiency in terms of the heat that had and the lightness. And so those were the characteristics that people were looking for. And of course, material also is very important for architecture of an airframe because lighter weight helps extend range, and it reduces the amount of fuel that's consumed, and it also reduces the amount of carbon. But it also enables better aerodynamics that reduces drag and increases range, and then reduces fuel consumption. And at the same time, it helps improve low observability. So with material science, you can improve propulsion, and you can improve the airframe to extend range and reduce fuel consumption. And so that's a technology that I think is going to be very important, particularly as we start to electrify. Because the thing about electric propulsion is your takeoff weight is the same as your landing weight, not the same when you're burning fuel. And so range becomes even more important, which means lightweight becomes important, which means things like composites are important, and in aerodynamics, reducing drag and laminar flow are all important.
Weight and aerodynamics are going to be extremely important on the next aircraft and next technology, next generational technology for sure.
Right. So I know Hexcel is a material company, and I said material technology, but it's because materials end up in every single product, whether it's in the engine, in the fan blades, or in the core of the engine, or it's in the airframe. Technology of material and lightness and being to be able to accept very high temperatures and still perform is all incredibly important. And so the advances in material technology, I think, are going to continue to help redefine the aircraft of the future.
No, that's great. And so I would say a last topic here. that's near and dear to me is industrial policy, right? Obviously, spending last year, the better part of last year at the Department of Commerce, and implementing America First trade policy and the reindustrialization, reshoring, foreign direct investment, all of these things that were so important for us now. Maybe Tom, can you talk a little bit about your thoughts around maybe the pendulum, how it's swung from one way and maybe now coming back, and what that looks like from your perspective, reshoring, industrialization, the good, the bad, the ugly of it.
Well, again, as I said, I grew up in Detroit and saw the automotive industry firsthand, but saw a lot of the jobs leave southeastern Michigan. It wasn't just Detroit; it was Pontiac, Flint, Saginaw, Lansing, and a lot of other smaller communities around. And all those jobs went overseas. And I think people were somewhat okay with that because they said, well, we'll just buy our German luxury cars or our Japanese cars that are small and fuel efficient. But you do need manufacturing jobs. You do need an industrial base. I think industrial base is very closely aligned to national security because, as I called them before, they're noble jobs. They pay well, but they're so important in terms of what you need to do in times of trouble like we're in right now. And you need to replenish your munitions, or you need to develop new submarines or new aircraft carriers or build new airplanes. This requires an industrial base. And so I'm very encouraged by the Trump administration putting so much emphasis on rebuilding the manufacturing base, the defense industrial base in this country. It takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. But we started the process. We started to put emphasis on it. And I think that's important. And I do see changes. I do see people talking about global supply chains and the risks involved in how do we start to make sure that our supply chains are closer to our production capacity and that we're not necessarily relying too much on long supply chains that cut across a lot of foreign countries. When we build in Europe, we buy in. When we build in the U.S., we try to buy in the U.S. and same in Asia. And so I think the emphasis that the current administration is putting on strengthening our manufacturing base is a good one, but it's going to take some time. We're going to have to work on it. It won't happen.
It absolutely does. I mean, I think the motto has gone from offshore to reshore and maybe some near shore where it makes sense. And that's that global risk, make it more of a local risk or regional risk, right? Versus a global risk. And I think we've seen some impacts on what that could be in a negative standpoint over the last couple of years. Well, that's great, Tom. No, I wanted to thank you for joining. Any last kind of comments that you'd have for the listeners here and for the podcast?
Well, Alex, I'm glad you were in the government and you helped contribute to the Department of Commerce and manufacturing. But we're also happy to have you back in the industry as the factory doctor. The supply chain, we're still recovering. So we need some help to get there, but these production rates are going up, and I know you're going to help us get there.
Yeah, no, it's great to be back, right? It's bittersweet, but it's more sweet than anything to be back in industry. So I appreciate those kind comments, but that's great, Tom. So I would think that if anybody wanted to get a hold of you, they could probably just message you through LinkedIn or something like that if they found something interesting here. So I'll just kind of put that out there that you're pretty visible on LinkedIn if they wanted to get in touch with you.
Absolutely. Would be happy to engage with anyone.
Absolutely. All right, Tom. Well, I appreciate you joining the podcast here and bringing your expertise. And at that, we'll sign off. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Al.